He wildly hoped that it would suddenly end in the same cyclonic way it had begun. He would not argue about it. He dismissed it again and again with the simple expression, "ridiculous." He could not feel a thing that was so much outside himself, and he harboured the eternal suspicion which the artist always has for the politician. And then suddenly had come that little buff slip of paper, ordering him to appear before a certain medical board on a certain day at a certain time. Even then he had not grasped the full significance of this onslaught on his liberty. He still thought it was ridiculous. Something would happen. He would get out of it. It was not till that moment when he stood, naked among a crowd of naked men, that he realized that his liberty was really at stake, that the war was something which tremendously concerned himself. He followed them into another room, where an old man was sitting at a desk, talking to a lieutenant, and a plump doctor in civilian clothes appeared to be chasing naked men about the room, and calling out remarks in a mechanical voice to a clerk. They were weighed, measured, examined in every detail, made to hop, skip, and jump and bend. Nothing seemed to be overlooked. Man was reduced to a physical automaton, and nothing else seemed to be of the slightest consequence. Wainwright hopped, skipped, and jumped with the rest. The doctor asked one or two questions, and he found himself replying huskily, "Yes, sir," or "No, sir," as the case might be. Eventually he found himself standing before the old major and the doctor, feeling more naked than ever, and the major was saying, "You've never suffered from any organic disease, then?" "No, sir." They drew apart and talked, and he suddenly felt a desire to go up and say, "I say, you know, I shan't be any good at this sort of thing." But that choking sense prevented him from doing this, and also the realization that from their point of view, that would also be ridiculous. In a few moments the doctor turned round and said, "All right, dress up." He dressed and waited interminably in another room, among his friends in the cloth caps. At length they were dispatched to a corridor, where they waited for their names to be called out. He received another buff slip of paper. He had been passed A1. He was liable to be called in 14 days' time as a first-class fighting man in the Great War. He walked out of the building, greedy for his momentary liberty, but dazed by the astounding position he faced. He walked all the way to Adelphi Terrace and let himself in. The quiet dignity and beauty of his sitting-room calmed him. The soothing proportions of his William and Mary walnut furniture, the Adams Bay window overlooking the river, on the table an open book on old English mansions, and a pile of architectural reviews and builders, a fire glowing in the grate and inviting him to warm his toes as he reclined on the tall easy-chair by the side of which was a book-rest and his favourite pipe. This was reality, and the menacing disturbance outside was a dream. In any case, here he was himself, and here he could think this thing out to its bitter conclusion. And so, from that time, Wainwright began to try and think earnestly and intensely about the war and his own position. And if the conclusions he came to were not ours, we must in any case give him the credit for having tried very hard to get his thoughts into a true focus. And we must allow considerably for his upbringing and environment. For the mind of Wainwright was a very complex affair, and the effect of the war was like that of a bear disturbing a beehive. If you conceive a swarm of bees intent on the delicate construction of a hive, and suddenly having their well-laid plans obliterated by the nozzle of the fierce monster, you may imagine how for some time his thoughts buzzed round in a complete state of panic. There was no cohesion, no unity, no concentration. He felt personally outraged. He had no feelings of animosity to any living thing. He had read very little history and no political economy. He abhorred politics and lived for beauty. He had been brought up to see the good in everything, to believe the best in everyone, and in the unswerving faith that war was a thing of pre-civilized ages. Incidentally, he distrusted